Follow me, it's a delve in a leverage key, it fix harmony, everybody naturally. So purpose on the physical planes demands to me.
Well, that was a transition. Doing my best here.
You did good. You did good.
Welcome to Size of Thoughts, the Alliance of History Graduate Students radio broadcast, normally hosted by Jacob Glicklick. Today, I am your guest host. My name is Michael Gonzalez, and I'm joined by a couple guests who I'll introduce here in a minute. I would like to start here first with the disclaimer. Like I said, this is Size of Thoughts. My name is Michael Gonzalez. I'm the producer of the show for today. The things you will hear over the next 50 minutes represent the views of Size of Thoughts and the people making them. All opinions and quotations in no way represent River West Radio and are the sole responsibility of the producer, guests, and callers. River West Radio is not liable for any legal issues arising from the content of this program. So, like I said, thank you for joining us. My name is Michael Gonzalez, and I'm joined here in the studio by Will. Can you say your last name for me?
Chakaritis.
We're also joined on the phone by John Terry.
Hello.
All right, so it sounds like the technology is working and we're all on the air. And I have the privilege to speak to each of you, and unfortunately we were going to speak to a couple other people, but that fell through, so it'll be the three of us, and have the privilege of speaking to you all about a recent trip that we all took to New Orleans. So I'm going to introduce that in a minute. But I would like to say, yes, we are three dudes talking about this, but we did have, we tried a little bit to get some gender parity, whatever modest measures we had, but things fell through. So
Three's Company.
Three's Company. So we are discussing this week about our recent trip to the American Historical Association Conference, which took place in New Orleans from January 3rd to January 6th. Basically, a wonderful 4-day weekend that we all had in New Orleans, thanks in large degree to the UW-Milwaukee History Department. And I want to give a special thanks to the Alliance of History Graduate Students and its leadership, including Jacqueline Schultz, and there were a couple other people, Luke Wolf and others who did a lot of work to make this happen. And especially thank you to Mary Wiesner-Hanks and anybody else. Is there anybody else that I should mention in the program?
Kathy on the administrative team did a good job helping us out.
So we basically got funded to go to the American Historical Association Conference. The American Historical Association, just to give you a little background, is since 1884, I believe, has been is really the largest association of professional historians, and not strictly professional historians, but for the most part, in the country. And every year they have a conference. Last year it was in Chicago, maybe?
Yeah, Chicago.
This year it was in beautiful New Orleans. And thanks to our program, we were able to spend 4 days there. And we're going to debrief. We're going to talk about what we had, what we experienced, and what we found to be really fulfilling, and kind of what critique we have of it. So that's what we're going to spend the next 50 minutes or so doing. In addition to the American Historical Association, there were actually a number of affiliated societies and other things going on there. The Latin American History Association. There was like a huge contingent of Catholic Historical Association there.
Well represented.
So there was a lot of things going on, and we each had our own unique experiences, and so we're going to kind of unpack that this hour.
Sounds good.
But before we get into the conference, reflections on New Orleans. What did you all think?
Yeah, I'll kick it off, John, if you don't mind. I thought New Orleans was a pretty awesome city. We kind of have this impression of what the city's like. They have a viable tourism industry. They got the Bourbon Street, and you think about Fat Tuesday and what goes on during Mardi Gras. But I'd say my favorite part of the city itself was just getting out of that downtown and that French Quarter, and really heading out into the some of the smaller neighborhoods outside. We went out to the Frenchman Street area, listened to some good jazz, and ate some good food. And I'd probably say, and that was one of the final nights we were there. That's probably my favorite time. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think, the one thing is you can really get tired of Bourbon Street in a matter of moments, or you really kind of get the idea of what's going on there. But honestly, I think I agree with Will 100%. Just getting even a little bit away. You're not necessarily, it's kind of a tourist city, but I thought that it was really cool when we kind of went out into the neighborhood, and I would imagine that we could have went to other neighborhoods too and enjoyed ourselves going elsewhere. So I mean, it was so jam-packed that, you know, by the time we 9 to 5 the conference, it was sort of tough to get far away. But from what we saw, I really enjoyed it, and I would have liked to explore. The main regret is I would have liked to go over and see what the university area was like, but I thought it was a great town. What do you think, Mike?
There's a lot to see, and we barely saw any of it. I will say this: I did that first night, got a chance to eat some gumbo and some jambalaya. That was good, and I think that was, you know, the only time I had some sort of like, you know, supposedly authentic. It was pretty good, sort of New Orleans cuisine. Bourbon Street, yeah, there's not much of that on Bourbon Street. You know, it's essentially, what do we have, the daiquiris and the pizza, and the nudie bars and
all sorts of temptations kind of floating around.
Yeah, and I will say, it was kind of fun to get off of Bourbon Street. It was interesting to go across the river, and we should credit John with this idea. We went over to the AHGS neighborhood, which I found to be somewhat surprising, though, that given the history, which I knew very little about before this, but given the history that it was as a sort of a center of jazz activity, and there was the jazz walk when we got off the ferry to that neighborhood, how essentially sort of tame and white Algiers was, what had become of Algiers.
Seemed to be gentrifying a little bit.
Yeah, just a tad. Essentially, we were I think restricted to those gentrified areas, but there's a lot of history. Did you all get a chance to take in any of the more historical sites? I know we spent a lot of time together, but we had a little bit of chance to be a part. And I know some people went to like cemetery tours. Did any of y'all get a chance to do anything really historical there?
Just to diverge on that a little bit, I didn't really take any of the tours that were offered, but kind of serendipitously, we all ran into that site where Plessy, Homer Plessy was actually arrested, and where the origins of that Plessy versus Ferguson case, and that was probably the coolest, just kind of out of nowhere public history moment that I had on that trip, and I thought it was pretty neat to run into that plaque, and it was nighttime, it was dark out, but we were all
totally
like
random.
Transfixed, just staring at this plaque and reading in both sides, and it was kind of cool just to see and put it into context and where that took place.
Yeah, definitely, man. I think that I don't know about you guys, but I certainly could have done a lot more research going in. You know, I mean, Rich actually came in with a plan, and, you know, it seems like he followed through on a lot of that. So I just kind of winged it. But, you know, like Will said, we just are walking around and all of a sudden find the site of, you know, what becomes one of the more important Supreme Court cases in United States history, and we just kind of randomly walked by it. And I think like Jackson Square, I mean, a lot of the things are still kind of touristy, but still very important historically. So I'd imagine just walking around more and more, we would have bumped into more and more things. But
yeah, that
sort
Plessy,
of like, well, I didn't actually go out and explore too much.
Right there with you, yeah. The Plessy versus Ferguson site was that was totally interesting. That we just randomly stumbled upon that. I will say though, none of us had a chance to take advantage of it. Probably partly due to lack of foresight, but also partly due to lack of funding, I'm sure. But the AHA did offer several historical tours, which I thought were rather interesting. They had the cemetery tours. I believe they had a walking tour of sort of Reconstruction era, like race riot battles that took place, and so there was an opportunity that was provided by the AHA to really take in the history. One thing that I found interesting was the short little streetcar ride that we took earlier in the weekend. I went to a panel talking about modernity and streetcars and just kind of the interrelation between the two, and I found that to be an interesting experience. But yeah, there's so much more to see. You know, if one of us would have had the foresight to bring a sort of like Go New Orleans book or something, just something, New Orleans on $5 a day or whatever. So that'll be for our next trip. So I'm assuming you all are going to go back for the Super Bowl and Mardi Gras, which is coming up.
If the Patriots can make it, I might make my way down there. We'll see.
Yeah.
But
I can tell you that city would be crazy during the Super Bowl.
yeah, and it was it was off season while we were there, but it was interesting to see the historians on Bourbon Street, because I did see quite a few that I recognized from panels, and then just walking down the street, and it's midnight, 1 in the morning, and we were pretty tame by New Orleans standards. I mean, we were not out. We had a good time, and we definitely took advantage of the city, but we were not out till I guess the city never closed in some ways.
I thought that was that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. It really didn't even seem to matter what day of the week it was whatsoever.
Right. Yep. If you all don't mind, we could just kind of jump into the conference.
Yeah.
There was so much going on at the conference. There were, like I said, there were all these affiliated associations. There were panels that were going. I mean, there were so many panels that were going on. What were the positives? What were the takebacks? The things that you guys really kind of sort of benefited from, whether it be interesting panels that you attended, sort of like kind of professional benefits that came with this. Maybe I'll turn to Will first, since you're sitting next to me in the studio here.
Sure.
You want to talk about anything that you found particularly interesting, anything you learned, or anything that specifically relates to your research interests that you'd like to share, and kind of what you took out of the conference?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say I approached going to this conference, my approach was twofold. I wanted to basically learn as much as I can and network as much as I could with people who are studying race, crime, punishment in America, the carceral state. But also, I wanted to learn a little bit more about teaching digital history methods and kind of the tricks of the trade and the best practices in that field. And there were a few good panels for both of those topics. I'd say probably my favorite panel throughout the entire conference was one that was chaired by Heather Ann Thompson from Temple University. It was a film screening. It's called Criminal Injustice, Death and Politics at Attica. And it premiered basically this documentary film on the Attica Rebellion. What was new about this documentary is that it basically gave you the legal history and really emphasized the political ramifications of Attica. It was focused heavily on Nelson Rockefeller and his political ambition, and it kind of gave that as a reason for why there was not kind of a better ending to that story, rather than the brutal massacre of countless prisoners of color. But yeah, that was a fascinating discussion, and it was chaired by one of my my heroes in Heather Thompson. So it was really cool to kind of see that.
Cool. Yeah. Just going off of that real quick, I mean, that sounds like a fascinating documentary. Something I wish I had taken in was that there were a number of feature films. John Sayles, John Sayles was there all weekend and presenting, along with discussion, many of his films. And neither of you, I think, got a chance to see any of those.
No, I didn't.
And I've seen some of them in the past. That it kind of, there's, like I said, there's so much going on. But yeah, Will, that sounds really interesting. The Attica documentary for sure is something I'd like to check out. The digital history, yeah, they definitely had some of that going on. You were able to do some networking, I think, from this. I mean, you don't have to dish all the details, but you were able to make some connections and meet some people. And
yeah, definitely. Kind of in different and unique ways too. I mean, I caught a few Twitter followers. I don't know if anyone follows on Twitter, but we're able to get a few historians to follow my feed, and that allows me to communicate with them about different issues in digital history and even the carceral state and those other race and crime topics that I was looking forward to studying. So yeah, I was able to network and connect with all sorts of different scholars.
Okay. Cool. John, I guess I could throw the same question at you. I know that you attended some sort of professional development sessions. You were also able to attend some of the more sort of traditional, paper reading sessions. Anything you want to tell us? Anything that's stuck out as really interesting or important, or kind of what you really took out of the conference?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing is, and we can definitely talk about, some of our criticisms of the conference, but I mean, the one thing that it does is it brings so many people, not just the presenters, but the people who are there to watch. Like, it brings really a lot of sharp people from, I would say all over the country, although it seemed like, the coasts were very well represented, but to get that kind of environment, I mean, at all, is really kind of fascinating. And, you know, you guys said this, it's like 40 different panels going on every hour, and really a lot of them are interesting, and it's really kind of hard to tell just, you know, based on the title, so who knows what we missed. But I did do something that's probably different than a lot of people, is actually attending these early career and career development things. And I think that it's good. One thing that it does is it shows that there is some concern, there's an awareness that, you know, getting a PhD does not get you the tenure-track job necessarily. I'm thinking about different ways to market yourself as a valuable person based on your degree. So actually thinking more about the use of your degree. And so I went in knowing that I was going to be going to these kinds of panels, but I think that that's an interesting way to think about, you know, the problems with us getting hired is to sort of reassess what our actual skills are. You know, it's kind of like the idea, and I get this, and I'm sure that you guys encounter this kind of too, is like, I feel like I really don't know anything outside of just these little things that I study that don't necessarily always seem valuable outside of a classroom. But, you know, I've also been training academically for 10 years, but, you know, to also have that feeling that you don't know anything. So I don't know, it was good to hear how people are thinking about remarketing us, revaluing, not feeling like, you know, a failure when you don't get that tenure-track job, but instead feeling like, you know, one of the many people who don't. And I think, like the digital history, you know, they have this kind of mini conference within a conference that was sort of focused on this. And, you know, there's a lot of good things there, and it's nice to just see that group of people, you know, the people who are sitting in my shoes who are really nervous about what is, you know, going to happen going forward. I think it's nice at a place like that to network with those folks too. And then, you know, on top of that, as you know, Heather Ann Thompson, I've been sending her a couple of emails to try to get together a panel for next year's OAH and AHA. Either or, it's sort of unbelievable what you can do with just like a question or a handshake. And it was a really nice environment. I mean, Will and I were both at the Heather Ann Thompson panel, and, you know, I mean, she's extremely well respected and sought after as a public speaker. But it was like a really casual environment. So I think, you know, for any potential person listening to this, you know, it's really good to go to this big time professional conference, because every time you shake hands with somebody, you really could actually be making a kind of connection that can help you, whether, you know, I mean, a lot of people are careering there, and again, we can kind of talk about that with the complaints, but, you know, it's sort of fantastic, and I bumped into several people that I had known, several people that I had wanted to meet, and actually ended up somebody just based on a question that I asked at a panel asked me to submit a paper to a really well-respected journal. So there's just these kind of, and that was at a really sort of an oddball panel, so there's these kind of unbelievable opportunities for stuff like that. And so as cynical as I am about the event itself, it is pretty fantastic for those kinds of things, and it makes it easy to develop professionally, I think, and they're emphasizing that.
Yeah, one thing that I heard you talking about, John, I just want to touch on. I'm glad the AHA is pushing towards more of a digital history direction. I know they've made great strides in the last couple of years to try to incorporate more digital history panels and try to think about how the approach to doing history and teaching history is changing and has changed over the last decade or so. And it's a move in the right direction. But I think that the AHA in general, and we'll talk about this more, has a long way to go in terms of preparing the students for, you know, just having a frank discussion with students about the job market and what it's really going to take to get a job, not just in the academy, but outside the academy. And I'd like to see even more public history focused sessions at the AHA, and maybe they can center their networking receptions on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it sounds like you guys did a little of that work, though. I mean, that it obviously goes beyond just, you know, going to class and, you know, getting an A. Essentially, it's networking, and you guys are talking about getting papers published and getting, you know, sessions proposed for future conferences. And so it sounds to me like, you know, it's kind of one of the benefits of this conference was just that ability to go out there and make a name, not only for yourselves, but, you know, making a name for our program, hopefully.
Yeah.
The fact that we had we were able to send, I believe it was 8 of our graduate students, not to mention a few of our faculty that were presenting there, and wish I had run into more of them, but I know that there was, art history professors, and there were professors from our department that were presenting, and not to mention we had on the closed circuit television running through the hotels, through the Marriott and the Sheraton.
Our promo tape.
The promo tape, which is also online. You guys should check it out on historianstv.com or org or something. I'm not sure exactly what it is. But you can find it, and it gives a little 5-minute promo featuring Will and I, along with others. We're just kind of like mannequins. Will and I. We're just in the shot.
Just nodding.
But yeah, hopefully we're making a name for the program, because I think that's part of it as well. The academia is such a, for lack of a better word, like it's a tribe. It's a, I think one of our professors described it that way, and it's, you gotta. Unfortunately, the sort of competitiveness is at that level that you kind of you need to everything you can do to kind of give yourself a leg up is important. Any other panels you all found interesting? Anything that you found that particularly kind of surprising or shocking, or anything that you thought was really kind of cool?
Go ahead, John.
Well, I really, if I was ranking them, I would say I really enjoyed, me and Mike went to a panel. I mean, the one thing, and again, there's a lot of stuff you can say for kind of the critique, but it's a place where it's white. It's awfully freaking white there, and awfully male too. I would say probably 2/3 of the presenters to me, this is a very qualitative assessment, seem to be male, and 90% or more were white. So, to actually go to a panel with racial diversity, I think that seemed cool. And it really seemed like a panel that had a little bit of a different feel. And, it's not like it's inherently conservative, but this is a place where, big shots are come and expected to really kind of do what they do, not really to be throwing out new and necessarily challenging stuff. So, some are sort of safe. That one felt pretty good, I think.
Yeah, I like
and,
that one.
the career development ones were just a different style, which was interesting. But yeah, I really that last one stuck out to me. That was student activism, black student activism,
the Black Power movement, and
1972, sort of like the Black Power moment on campus. I thought that was really great myself.
Yeah, I found that to be really fascinating. I will say, for me personally, I didn't kind of approach it. I'm just starting the program here, so I didn't really do a lot of networking, and just kind of not really thinking about that point yet, the sort of career aspect. I'm really more thinking about sort of like research interest aspect, and I found the conference to be really enlightening for me, in that the stuff that I found the most interesting came out of the Conference of Latin American History, and there was some really cool stuff that was going on there. And kind of just really affirming for me my interest in Latin American history, and kind of helping solidify sort of what I'm thinking about for my own research interest. I found probably the most interesting session, which kind of is telling to my sort of fascination with the sort of legacies of history and kind of how it affects our contemporary world, was that the most interesting session was really not a historical session. It was included panelists that were historians, but it was in the Conference of Latin American History, and it was the panel was on Evo Morales' Bolivia, and it was really talking about the contemporary world, but trying to historicize it and talk about the sort of antecedents and kind of putting it into historical perspective and trying to understand the contemporary world. And I found that to be really fascinating. The panelists, Steve Stern was the one who I remember in particular, who was a professor at UW-Madison that I actually had the privilege of taking a class with when I was an undergrad there about a dozen years ago, and a couple other academics whose names escape me, but it was really fascinating, and so I found that to be really interesting and kind of pushing me in that direction. So I thought that was kind of really positive positive thing to come out of the conference. And there is a critique to be made, not only of the the issues dealing with American history, but also with Latin American history. There's plenty to be said. If you guys have anything else you want to point out as far as like what you got from this conference that really was a positive, now's the chance, because I think that we will dig into the negative too, and I don't want to dwell too much on that. I mean, this was a wonderful opportunity, and I want to stress like that. I was glad I went. It was worth it for me. But before we get into it, is there anything else that really positive that came out of this?
I'd say, other than the Attica film, my favorite session was the one called "Genealogies of the Carceral State: Crime, Policy, Crisis, Race, Resistance in 20th Century America," and John was in this panel with me as well. I think one of the reasons why I think it was such an effective panel is that they had young historians, young scholars who were presenting their work for the first time on a fresh subject. I mean, this is new. This is something that's new and being studied, is this phenomenon of mass incarceration over the past few decades, and predominantly of people of color. And historians are just starting to think about the relationship between local communities and the police for the first time. And I think that this is probably one of the more radical sessions that was available to urbanists and to American historians at the AHA. It was certainly cutting edge. We've mentioned her name a lot. Heather Thompson chaired the panel, and it was also commentated on by Mary Ellen Curtin at American University, who's kind of one of the she wrote a book that was kind of a forerunner to this study of mass incarceration and punishment, crime and punishment in America, and its intersection with race. But yeah, no, it was a cool panel. It was definitely the highlight of the conference for me. I had targeted it from the beginning, and I think at the same time it ran up against some of the same limitations we're about to discuss. And I think that is the emphasis on 60s America and 70s America, and that kind of being either a turning point or an ending point in
the end
in
of
US
history. Is that what I think Karl Marx called it?
I would say before getting into the negative too, one interesting panel. Just this is sort of like a hint to us when we're planning our own conference, and really, I think a way that conferences would be a lot more enjoyable if a lot of them were like this, but there was just very few people there, and that's how it was on Sunday, and that's how it is for some panels anyways. And so, there was 4 people who were going to speak plus a commentator, but there was only 3 people in the audience. And so rather than actually going through the sort of foolishness of having the person stand up and talk to the 3 people in the audience, we just sat around and sort of had a round table powwow. Nice. And it was the greatest, that was by far the most intense conversation that I've ever had, anything like that. And it's really with people who are, the guy who's sitting next to us like, yeah, I guess that one was on CNN, stuff like you get a guy who has New York Times best-selling kind of books, and to just sit there like that and chat. So that'd be one positive thing, is that actually when you get out of the sort of standard format, I thought it was really, really cool. Even though the subject material wasn't necessarily that relevant to me.
That sounds interesting. There were sessions that I went to that could have turned into that because there were so few people. Yet, we maintained the pretense and this air of dignity that we kept up. It was a great experience, and there was a lot of good things, and it's hard for us to really grasp at what actually happened, in part because there were so many different sessions going on. Mm-hmm. We had to pick and choose based on titles, and sometimes things didn't turn out the way they were supposed to. Certain panelists didn't show up. There was a couple of those that I went to that were unfortunate. The one I really wanted to hear was the one that family emergency, something came up and they weren't able to attend. So missed out on that. But there's plenty to critique, and I think we should critique it. The very fact that it was all white men. Here we are, 3 white men discussing this critique of it being all white men. It's an endemic, and it's something that affects all levels of the discipline, and so we need to be cognizant of that, and also of our own, our own. The part we play in that. I will say, just like I said before, there was some modest attempt at gender parity for tonight's panel. We had a couple other guests that were going to join us, but were unable to, and so it was. We tried somewhat to make this less of a, white men talking about why there's too many white men in history. But but if we could turn to sort of the critique that we had, and there's a few things that we talked about while we were there. I think it's important that we are always critical of all existing institutions, and so like that, I mean, the discipline, the conference, the association, anything. I don't know if anybody wants to start out with something burning that they really want to start with.
Well, one thing I would talk about is just, it's sort of this. It's very much a structural problem, like, of course it's going to be us three white men who are talking about that problem, like there's very much a structural thing at play, and it's really hard for, like I know one thing is, like, there's no requirement for this, but if you're going to pitch a panel for the OHA or the AHA, you are going to be more likely to succeed if you try to go for gender balance and racial diversity. So it's one of those sort of like, it's this unwritten rule that if you diversify, you will have a little bit better of odds to get in. But it's certainly structural. I mean, it says a lot about the discipline, is that it's people wearing, pretty fancy suits, staying in hotels on department dime, living it up and partying in a city that was like, devastated not even 5 years before that. So there's definitely issues there. I mean, it's really, really bourgeois, and I mean, it's pretty white male oriented. I don't know if you guys, I mean, it doesn't defeat the purpose to me, and I don't think that's purely like hypocritical for someone, to have money and talk about poverty, but there's certainly problems there. I don't know if you guys saw that.
Well, that's interesting. You think about those gender or even racial requirements, or just making it a more diverse panel. It sounds like the AHA is conscious of its perception by the public as being an old white man's organization. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going far enough to resolve it. I think that the panels that I attended were certainly gender balanced. Some of them were racially balanced, but I tended to see the panels that focused on race as an issue, or the panels that focused on race and crime as issues. So obviously there's going to be an advantage there. But, I think about, I feel like the OAH, the Organization of American Historians, is maybe just slightly more conscious of some of these factors.
I would agree with that, yeah.
And the AHA is kind of moving at a glacial pace to correct some of these issues and diversify their panels, diversify their approaches and their methodologies of history as well. But yeah, what do you think?
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. We were talking about that before. It could either, they're both really old organizations. So what is the excuse for the AHA? I think,
they both, both organizations have a pretty long, deep structural history, and really, you encounter that in historiography classes and stuff, because it's usually big-time prominent historians who are the president of either organization at any given time. The AHA started with Southern history. I mean, it was a old boys club, very intentionally. Not to say that the OAH was not that, but really for the actual structural history, the OAH grew out of a journal that had sort of grown out of dissatisfaction with the AHA, and not to say that it is a bastion for sort of lefties in comparison by any means,
right.
But part of their history, part of their mission, the OHA, was to actually be something different, to be more inclusive. And I think that really, it has to do with who's the president of this organization at any given time, and sort of what are they writing about, and what are their politics in their writing, and what do they do.
Can I just give a quick shout out to my former professor, Alan Crowd, who's going to be the president of the OAH, Organization for American Historians.
Okay.
So
all right.
Got to give that shout out to Alan.
And we should.
There you go.
I don't know if you all know anything about the AHA president. I know very little, and I'm not about to bash anybody. But Bill Cronin, UW-Madison professor. Right. So, do you guys have any insight into his leadership?
I mean, he's outspoken. We saw the issue that that he faced with kind of the hacking of his email records and his outspokenness.
Oh, that was Bill. That was him.
Yeah.
Oh.
Bill Cronin.
Yep. So he had certainly said some pretty nasty things about Scott Walker and some things that were in support. He's a great. His books are. It's a 550-page monster about Chicago. That's a really good book. A really, really good book. Yeah. Really well regarded. I've heard things about him personally. That it's tough to get in his class. That's what it's like to have a big shot. You have to sort of like interview your way in and prove your way into his class, and that's kind of a problem with the academy itself. But yeah, and then Grossman was the president before, I believe, last year.
Yep.
And he had written a great book on I think it was Promised Land, about people moving north to Chicago, the Great Migration, and so. Those personalities are kind of reflected, I guess, in the overall mission. I'd like to see, I'd see it as becoming more progressive, like Will said. Still definitely a long way to go, but at least appear to be heading in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I know that we're looking at the issues of race, class, radical thought, things that are just kind of missing. What else is missing? What else could we have had at an AHA that was not there, or that really could have added to it, or possibly I'm asking the wrong question. Is it a panel that more panels that we're looking for? Is it a change in focus that we're looking at, or is it something? Is it not the AHA? Is our critique ultimately about the profession, academia, and just sort of the way that it is? And I think, John, you already identified it as a structural problem. What's the big critique here? What are we looking at?
I think style, is important to me on some level. With our conference, we're very much conscious of the way that we want the actual panel to unfold. And I really think, like I said, I had the great opportunity, and, Mike saw this, I'm sure that Will saw this, and everyone sees this who goes. It's just like, do you really have to go through the formality when, there's just a few people there? It makes so much more sense to just kind of sit down and talk about some of these things. So I would say, my structural things is I think that they should make it easier for early career people to get in, because it's really a place where you can make a name for yourself and you can invite people to come and watch your panel if they want to know about you. So I really think that they should be more conscious of that. And the OHA, I think, does a better job of that. I just even, they talk about, when you look for the call, it says it will accept experimental approaches. I think what they really need is to get big shots in the field who are well associated with the board and know many things internal to the AHA. I think that those people need to do really actually experimental panels.
Yeah, well, and maybe the issue is not even so much getting the panels, because I think one of the things we talked about is some of these panels are so poorly attended. In part, it seems because people aren't really interested in learning something new, or in going and seeing this cool, young, hip, new work that's being done. Instead, it might be just about networking, and you're down there because you've got some interviews, or you've got this going on. But ultimately, maybe part of the issue is, and even when you do have a cool panel, like the Black Power panel, is it a coincidence that it's put at the last time on the last day when most people have probably left the conference? Is that maybe that's a coincidence? But is there something deeper going on? So I think I've identified two issues. One is there disparity in kind of the organizing and the planning of the conference, and it's pure speculation. I don't really know how this all worked out. And the other issue is just sort of the approach that's taken by the attendees at the panel. So I don't know if either one of you wanted to comment on either two of those.
Well, yeah, I would say in terms of the timing of the sessions, it was kind of curious. Like, why would you have a film premiere at 8:30 a.m.? I don't know. It didn't make for an enjoyable watching experience. But yeah, I would say for me, substantively, I would like to see just a few more panels, and selfishly, I'd like to see more urban history.
Definitely.
Some more U.S. history that's dealing with certain gender and race issues within the cities. And I understand they need to localize the conference. A lot of the subject matter of sessions dealt with New Orleans and with slavery and with Civil War era history. I'd be curious about some fresher histories, maybe something that brings it up to the time of Katrina, and we can start talking about some of the urban issues that kind of led to Katrina, and why it was such a catastrophe for this nation, and why it was such a political disaster and social and economic disaster.
Yes, excellent point. And this brings us to something that, John, that you had expressed frustration with during the conference. This idea that seems to pervade the discipline that history history ended sometime in, I don't know what you would set the date as, but, 1960s is when it ends.
Watergate's the last thing we really need to talk about.
Yeah, and I know you had voiced frustration. Even at the panel that we were at, the Black Power panel, somebody had, we'd asked a question about the sort of legacies and the sort of contemporary effects of the Black Power movement at the university level, and somebody had kind of derided those comments, yours and another individual's comments, as being, I believe she used the word presentist, which I hadn't necessarily known that to be a dig before. But I know, John, you had expressed some frustration with that the panel you went to dealing with the sort of leftism in the U.S. You want to talk a little bit about that and anything you kind of...
I mean, really, to me, the question is as simple as this. We are, as historians, on some level, purveyors of sort of things that have happened, and are we just going to really, surrender the last 40 years to anybody who wants it, I guess, and actually just take our hands out of it and say we don't even care, we're just only here to get to like the 60s. And really it just, to me there's this great over exaggeration. You can't discount the important things that happened. You can look at every single decade and find these kinds of things. So it's frustrating to me because it really feels like we are willing, and at least through this conference, and certainly the kind of conference you go to, you go to an urban history conference, you're much more likely to be talking about what's happening today, and it's, very deficient in that regard. But I don't like the idea of the biggest big shots and the people who are actually influential outside of the academy, bestsellers and stuff like that. I really don't like the idea of us just saying, the history, that presentist would be a dig. That the things that happened 5 minutes ago, that's history, but it's the weird kind of history, and we're not going to worry about it for 20 years. So it's just very dangerous to me, and it just distorts the power of the 60s.
Isn't all history presentist in some way, though? We're all kind of coloring our interpretations of the past with present-day issues. There's an agenda on everyone's plate.
And personally, I'm explicit about my interest in the importance of the historical legacies in the present. That's kind of why I'm personally interested in, and I also like to focus on issues dealing with the last couple decades. In some ways, it makes me wonder, why am I in the history program? In some ways, it's because I like the sort of narrative form and what the sort of the toolkit that historians are able to use. But nonetheless, I'm so interested in contemporary issues. Right. It kind of brings to mind a conversation we had. There was a young woman who we met at one of the bars that we stopped at that first night. I forget what her name was, from NYU, and there was just we had an interesting conversation with her. But there was one thing in particular that she said that kind of struck me, makes me wonder if this is this sort of her attitude is really something that's pervasive throughout the discipline, or she essentially. I forget at what point she put the date, but she was interested in history of much farther back than what most of us look at, and I think most of us focus on 20th century, even really more recent stuff. But she said something to the effect of, this might have been the alcohol talking, but something to the effect of. She doesn't like to study more recent history because she's afraid she might offend somebody, and it just really struck me as just, it was bizarre. It's cowardly, yeah, but it was also just. It's almost like you're admitting that your viewpoint is offensive. Why are you going to offend somebody? Don't be offensive. Be critical, be conscious. It's like you're giving up your responsibility to care. I think, John, you had mentioned something a discussion that you had at the OAH, I believe, where you were talking in one of your panels. I don't know if you wanted to. Do you remember what I'm talking about? Where you said something about people in the hotel.
Neoliberalism and its discontent. And we do so much navel gazing and stereotyping things that are very real and happening sort of right in front of us. So, I was just really frustrated at that panel to hear people having this kind of abstract conversation where it's like, hey, the people that you're talking about are serving us cheese trays here and waiting on us sort of like slaves when we're having that big fancy suit and tie party. That's really... That's not acceptable, and I don't think that that's not what historians should be doing. And it's certainly there's a lot you can talk about the class, I guess, in academia, but those things are kind of, that really stands out to me as something that is extremely frustrating and is totally what's wrong with our discipline.
Well, it brings
I think
to
it has to do with giving up after the 60s.
Yeah, and it brings to mind sort of something I would like to see at conferences like this is just really more of a focus on how can you be an activist and an academic. I understand that there's a wariness among many academics to not want to be activists or not to want to be active at whatever level. I mean, I can understand people who are academics wanting to see their work as their activism. Nonetheless, how then can you make your work socially relevant? I would like to see panels that kind of focus on that, because it is possible. There are activist academics, and they're probably the ones that are the most well known. I know that there's probably a lot of historians who look down their nose at somebody like a Howard Zinn, but I'll tell you, his name is a household name, way more than any of these people who write their, really much more narrow monographs and very quality work that they do. And I understand, Howard Zinn. I'm gonna say what you will, but there's the Zinn Historical Project. There's like his work is being taught in the high school level. There are those who have made it their effort to really connect their work to the contemporary social world, and I don't see why that can't be made more explicit at conferences like this.
Yeah, I would say, Mike, I would say that. It's what are we in this profession for? Is it to speak to the masses, or is it to speak to each other? And I think that this is one of the aspects of public history that drew me to the field, is that it was about reaching out to people and engaging with ordinary people to try to take ownership of their histories and their pasts. I would say, I think that part of the issue is that historians are scared and they are nervous about the job market right now, and they're feeling that the more radical approaches to the craft are going to stave off potential employers and going to make them less marketable. And people are trying to be conscious about what they're writing and what they're saying and what they're posting on social networking sites or anything else like that, just because it's just so competitive. It's a tenuous procedure, and how are we going to have enough jobs or get the jobs available? But at the same time, we need to be true to who we are and what we're trying to study and what the larger purpose, what our mission is as historians.
Yeah, what you're talking about is not completely new. Just to the historiography class I took this last semester, in one of the books we discussed the University of Chicago at one point. All their new faculty hires had to be run by John D. Rockefeller beforehand. So this is not completely new, right. But it's something that we've got to be wary of. And for me, it just it makes it clear that I really shouldn't count on a career in academia as any sort of end goal. Instead, I'm going to take what I can and try to figure out how I can.
Yeah, maybe not on these terms.
Yeah, I'll just be a stay-at-home dad.
I think there's a couple things there. I don't care what you do outside of the academy, but if there's more people with PhDs in history out doing things in the world, I'm happier about that, than not. I don't care what you feel. If you're, maybe Newt Gingrich, right, is like the one terrible example, but if you're going to have your PhD in history and you are in politics, let's say, or anywhere where you're, working on public policy, theoretically, I'd like to think that I'd rather have that person. I'd rather have that history PhD working for the National Park Service, because then maybe I'll get a job too, right? But just that idea of like what Will's talking about, even just thinking about what public history is, not just necessarily, displays, monuments, and museums, but to think of like, hey, this person's working in insurance, but they have their PhD in history. What does that mean about the way that they approach their job?
Well, I believe
insurance.
One of our, and I should, say we're running just real close to the end here. I think we can go on till, 5 minutes till, it looks like, but we should probably wrap up here in a minute. But just going off of that, we have a conference coming up that I'd like to just mention, the Milwich, the Midwest, it's in Milwaukee here, the Midwest Labor Working Class History Conference that we're hosting, the Alliance of History Graduate Students is hosting at the UWM campus coming up here in February. And one of our keynotes that I believe, or at least I'm hoping, will be, I don't know if this is confirmed, but Christine Newman Ortiz was one of the possible candidates. She's the executive director of Voces de la Frontera, which is a Wisconsin-based immigrant rights and worker rights group. and she, I believe, has a MA in history herself. So I mean, you can be an activist and you can take that education. So we probably should wrap up. I wanted to get some final thoughts from everybody. Some of the things that we kind of left with. Anything last things you want to say about New Orleans? Anything you wish you would have seen, or maybe upcoming conferences? I know, Will, you're planning on hitting another conference. The OAH, I believe, is going to be in San Francisco in April. I don't know. Maybe you guys can see if we can get some funding for that. Is that a possibility? But I'll, or if you guys want to say anything about Millwich or anything, I'll give everybody a minute here. So maybe we'll start with Will. Is there anything final thoughts you wanted to leave us with?
No, if anyone's interested about information on Millwich, it's gradcolloquium.wordpress.com. You can find out more information there. We hope to live tweet the event at Millwich, MLWCH 2013. If anyone's on Twitter and wants to follow along with that, I'd say about New Orleans, my one regret, just in terms of seeing the city, was not going to the lower Ninth Ward and really exploring that area that was so devastated by Katrina and really did not get enough aid immediately. It's probably my biggest regret of the conference. And I would, just being an urban historian, I feel like going to the lower Ninth Ward would give me a little bit more perspective on the city.
Yeah, John, final thoughts.
I guess I agree. It's one of those things that's, it's fantastic and it's dangerous and it's, it's stupid and it's brilliant all at the same time. But I definitely would say to anybody listening, if you're really interested in, making a go out of this or doing anything with, these degrees, you really go to those things and really just take a look. On some level, you're kind of looking at what your discipline really actually sort of looks like when we all get together. So, go to the OAH, go to the AHA. I know it's not always cheap, but, try and get funding, do what you can. And when you get there, make the most of it. Go to every panel, ask a question. Don't be afraid to meet people. Good things can happen. And, along with Will, I would say my biggest regret definitely was not sort of seeing how the other half lives in New Orleans. I mean, we were in pretty sort of touristy, I guess, territory, and we didn't really get out and kind of see like how the people who are sort of struggling, the people who are hurt the most by Katrina, we actually saw the people who had kind of benefited on some level by it because they sort of got a fresh start and cleaned up everything, right? And after the damage, they kind of rebuilt and re-bourgeoisified. So I definitely agree with Will there. And if I went back, I don't think I'd get a hotel in the French Quarter. I would definitely be doing more things like that in the city, but great conference.
Definitely.
Great trip. We had a lot of fun.
I would second that, and I think we were limited in many ways by the very fact that you're at a conference like this. You've got so many things going on at the conference. You've been afforded this opportunity. It is not purely, you're not there to sightsee. You're there to go to this conference, but nonetheless, we try to take advantage of what we could. But even culturally, as far as being able to take in some more jazz. I was just the other day listening to the radio. Some community radio station, some Zydeco music came on, and I thought to myself, I didn't hear any Zydeco music. That's where it's at, and would have loved to had a chance to got to see more of that. I would like to make a trip back there. Final thoughts, Millwich, which is, when is it again, Will? What is the weekend? February something coming up here?
It's about 20.
A weekend of panels by
February 15th and 16th.
Graduate students from throughout the country, including from UWM, including Will and myself as well. And John, you'll be chairing a panel, I believe. Encourage anybody to come up to that. And thanks. I would just thank our listeners for joining us today. And I think it's about time for us to skedaddle out of here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.
And thanks for being on the air, John.
All right. Yeah, this is my second phone-in show.
All right.
Success.
All right, we'll talk to you guys. Hold it down in Milwaukee.
Thanks.
Keep the place warm for me.
Yeah,
See you when you get back.
Stay warm up in Minnesota. Whew, it is cold up there.
All right. We'll see you guys.
Bahama Dean.